The attempt by Washington to separate Russia and China, or at least to reduce their convergence, has so far failed. Therefore, America is preparing to face a Sino-Russian bloc, along with their satellites, whose scale requires reconvergence between the United States and its European and global allies to achieve sufficient strength. We include in the picture a strong reaction from American economic and financial actors to the risk of excessive blocking of global trade flows, which would negatively impact America. The likely outcome is a fairly balanced result in the ongoing confidential negotiations, about 30, between America and both allies and compatible nations concerning tariffs and non-tariff barriers to international trade. How far along are we on the path to a possible restabilization of the global system? The answer leads first to an analysis of Beijing's strategy. Researchers from my Euro-American think tank are trying to understand whether Vladimir Putin used Donald Trump's courting to obtain more resources from Xi Jinping or whether he had to yield to Chinese pressure. Available data allow for both interpretations. However, what is relevant now is the clear economic and financial sinicization of the Russian Federation. Not entirely. For instance, Beijing has not signed an agreement with Moscow for a pipeline, Siberian, from Russia, a top priority for Putin, thereby demonstrating that it does not want to be conditioned by Moscow but rather to condition it. Furthermore, the Russia-China financial exchange system, considering the heavy sanctions against Russia, is effectively a Chinese domain that benefits the Chinese more than the Russians. Additionally, many observers have questioned why Putin's speech during the recent celebration of the victory against Nazi Germany in 1945 was so short and flat. In think tank communications, there is speculation on whether Xi asked Putin to tone down the rhetoric to avoid exacerbating friction with the West, or whether Putin deliberately chose this posture to show that he is not closing the door on possible ceasefire negotiations in Ukraine. Either way, it should be noted that Putin finds himself in an uncomfortable position. My recommendation, along with that of my researchers, is not to take Russia's sinicization for granted, not just due to widespread national pride but also because signals from Russian elites suggest concerns about becoming a Chinese satellite if Putin falters. In think tank communications, there is speculation on whether Xi asked Putin to tone down the rhetoric to avoid exacerbating friction with the West, or whether Putin deliberately chose this posture to show that he is not closing the door on possible ceasefire negotiations in Ukraine. Either way, it should be noted that Putin finds himself in an uncomfortable position. My recommendation, along with that of my researchers, is not to take Russia's sinicization for granted, not just due to widespread national pride but also because signals from Russian elites suggest concerns about becoming a Chinese satellite if Putin falters. It is likely that the conflict between the two main powers will intensify, primarily over influence in the global south. My researchers have wondered whether there is a Chinese hand behind Pakistan's attack, disguised as an Islamist action, against India. They have also questioned whether China's strategy of generating multiple conflicts to erode American power, while simultaneously positioning China as a pacifier, may have prompted Trump, leveraging Israel, to take direct control over Gaza's fate in favor of convergence with Arab Sunni nations and initiate negotiations with Iran, a regime that is a Chinese proxy but not entirely under its influence, with much of the urban population exhibiting latent anti-regime sentiments. Certainly, China and America are competing for greater influence over the Islamic world. But Xi Jinping is not very strong domestically, as China's economic miracle has both run its course due to technical reasons and been hampered by American tariffs, which have already reduced its exports by about 25%. To balance growing internal dissent through nationalist rhetoric, increase deterrence against America, and prevent military forces from replacing him, Xi is ramping up military pressure against Taiwan. He has also indicated a willingness to negotiate with America, with preliminary talks now underway. Are there indications of prospective global stabilization in this preliminary and partial analysis? A review of certain draft documents from the London-Washington Agreement suggests that Trump will not forego tariffs of at least 10%, his idea of rebalancing give-and-take relations between America and the world, but will mitigate them in certain sectors based on commercial reciprocity and, especially, military and geo-economic cooperation against China. Could this serve as a model for US-EU relations? Yes and no. The EU could align with the US if it accepted a closer convergence with Washington, which would, in turn, granted American approval for non-strategic sector trade relations with China, similar to negotiations pursued by Japan, South Korea, and others. What kind of economic stabilization might emerge in the best-case scenario? Partial, but sufficient to maintain economic flows at a level adequate to prevent an economic depression. Italy? The dual loyalty to the EU and America, combined with an accelerated, almost frantic, global projection through bilateral strategic partnerships, is the right strategy for a country dependent on exports in a world that will remain metastable, though not entirely unstable. It is recommended to prioritize a bilateral Italy-Germany agreement and a deeper strategic partnership with the United States.